Welcome back to U.S. History. Today, we're learning about Chapter 4. Let's get into it. All right, so Chapter 4, Life in the Colonies. Let's look at our outline for the day. We've got the Magna Carta. This is going to be, kind of like the great-great-grandfather to the U.S. Constitution. It's one of the first documents that really establishes and codifies human freedom, that we're not going to have a full monarchy. We people have rights. Then we're going to talk about the English. Speaking of rights, we're going to talk about the English Bill of Rights. And in a minute, when we get to the American Revolution, our founding fathers are going to feel that their rights as Englishmen have been taken away, or they're not being treated as full Englishmen. And so this all goes back to the Bill of Rights. We'll talk about it. The Navigation Acts. Big deal, little deal, no deal, medium deal. Okay, it's pretty important to starting the revolution. So I want you to know what the Navigation Acts are and why the colonists would not like them. Okay, and then when it comes to life on the farm, we're just going to read about it. There's not like a major quiz or test question about it, but I want you to kind of understand what would it have been like to live back then? What would your life be like if you were born back then? Okay, this is just about human beings and just seeing, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Let's learn how we got here. So let's get going. Why is the Magna Carta important? First document that protects people's rights. Why were the Navigation Acts important? It's a log, quote unquote, on the Revolutionary fire, okay? This is one of the first things that England's gonna do towards the colonies, and the colonists are gonna be very upset, okay? What was life like in the colonies? We're starting to see socioeconomic stratification. That just means you're gonna have rich people, middle-class people, poor people, and then we'll talk about, but if you had to sum it up, most people are living on a farm, okay? So the Magna Carta limits the king's power. It's the first document that protects people's rights in England. Instead of having an absolute monarchy, this document says the king can do some things, but he can't do other things. It also it says you have to have a trial. You can't just be, no more you're guilty off with your head. Okay, we have to have a court and a hearing and things like that for at least some people. So here's a quick video explaining the Magna Carta. Oh, by the way, before the video starts, look for the king, and he's swimming in gold. What does that remind you?
This may look like a plain, unassuming piece of parchment, but is actually one of the most famous documents in the world. Magna Carta, meaning the Great Charter, has inspired people across the centuries, from Thomas Jefferson to Mahatma Gandhi. But why was the Charter originally created, and what does it actually say? Let us take you back to medieval England. It's the year 1215, and the ruler is King John. Many people believe that King John was one of the worst kings in history. He imprisoned his former wife, he starved his opponents to death, he allegedly murdered his own nephew, and pulled the beards of the Irish chiefs. King John had imposed heavy taxes on his barons in order to pay for his expensive foreign wars. If they refused to pay, he punished them severely or seized their property. The barons demanded that King John obey the law. When he refused, they captured London, and John was forced to negotiate. The two sides met at Runnymede in June 1215. The result of the negotiations was written down by the king's clerks into the document we know as Magna Carta. Although most of the Charter's clauses dealt with medieval rights and customs, Magna Carta has become a powerful symbol of liberty around the world. The most famous clause, which is still part of the law today, for the first time gave all free men the right to justice and a fair trial. No man shall be arrested or imprisoned except by the judgment of their equals and by the law of the land. To no one will we sell. However, this clause was not as liberal as it sounds. The Charter only applied to free men. The vast majority of people in 1215 were unfree peasants who were ruled over by their landowners. And although Magna Carta was intended to create peace between King John and his rebellious barons, England was plunged into civil war after the Pope declared the charter invalid. When King John died of dysentery in 1216, 9-year-old Henry III took to the throne. To keep the peace, Magna Carta was reissued several times during the 13th century, until it was finally made part of English law. Magna Carta has lived on for 800 years and is echoed in the United States Declaration of Independence and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Perhaps Magna Carta's most important legacy is that everyone, including our leaders, must obey the law. What started out as a document of specific complaints from a group of barons has turned into an international symbol of liberty, without which we might not have the rights we value so much today.
Okay, so why is the Magna Carta important? First document to protect people's rights. Okay, so what you need to see from England is this. At first, the king has all the power. Then Parliament starts to advise the king. Then Parliament has more power than the king and queen in some ways. I mean, the king and queen still exist, don't they? So they have power too. But as far as the day-to-day running of the government, it's done by Parliament, and then they have a prime minister. So the major difference between our system and theirs, there's a bunch of little differences, but we vote for the president, and then the Congress is separate. Here, it's whoever the number one legislator is in the legislative body, that person's the prime minister. I hope that makes sense. Don't worry if it doesn't. You'll learn about it later. Here's what there's questions for the prime minister. Here's some, this is what it looks like in there.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Chris Law.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Chris Law.
A very happy new year to you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to extend that to everyone in this House. It has been over 6 months since the European referendum. Embarrassingly for the Prime Minister, the Scottish Government is the only administration on these islands that have published a plan on what to do next. Has the Prime Minister read it yet? Has the Prime Minister read it yet? And when will she be publishing her own plan?
Well, can I join the honourable gentleman in wishing everybody in the House, not only members but all the staff of the House, a very happy new year? And can I say to him that I've, as I said to the liaison committee when I appeared in front of them before Christmas, I will, in a matter of weeks, be setting out some more details of our proposals on this issue. But I would like just to remind the honourable gentleman, when he talks about the Scottish Government's plan, that of course it is his party, the Scottish Nationalist Party, that wants to leave the United Kingdom and therefore leave the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, so I've done some of the heavy lifting for you. Bill of Rights, the English Bill of Rights, I should say. Parliament has the power to tax. Parliament has the power to raise an army. And there's freedom of speech in Parliament, okay? So in a little bit, we're going to start hearing this no taxation without representation. The American colonies say we should be represented in Parliament. There we go. All right, now we're on to the Navigation Acts. Shipments, yeah, you got to write them down. What are you doing? Get your pen out. Write these down. If I say Navigation Acts, look, there's three facts. What does that mean? It's test question 101. All of these were part of the Navigation Acts except. You know what I mean? So you need to know what these three things are. Shipments from Europe have to go to England first. So you want to buy a fancy dress from France? Well, it's got to go from France to England, then to the colonies. And what's going to happen when it goes to England? You're going to pay more. Exactly. Shipments have to be transported on English ships. Again, you'll have to pay more if you're a colonist. And colonies have to sell key products to England. So you want to sell something that you're making to France? No problem. You sell it to England, and then England will sell it to France. And England's not going to give you as much money. Does that make sense? And the colonists aren't going to like this very much, okay? This is part of that mercantilism and the exploitation of the colonists that are going to upset them. All right, we just learned them. You tell me now. I'm going to pause this tape if we're in class. If you're watching online, you tell me. Don't look at your notes. Try to put this in your brain. What are the navigation acts? Can you tell me? What are they? What's the first one? Okay. All products from Europe have to go through England. What's the second one? Has to be brought in on an English ship. Correct. And what's the last one? The colonies have to sell to England. Very good. Okay, good job. By the way, is that dabbing guy, is that still cool? That was cool 2 years ago when I made these slides. It's not cool anymore. All right. So if you're in class, here's what you're doing. You're getting a book, and we're going to read pages 107 to 110 in groups, and we have a little group exercise. If you're at home, just read 107 to 110, and you can write stuff down in the chat box, okay? You can read On the Farm. You can read Roles of Women, or you can read Young People. Don't just type it out or spit it out or read it out. What I want you to practice here is analyze and synthesize. What's the information that we need to know? What's important? See what you can do to boil this down. Okay? So take a minute and read your section. All right, welcome back. Here's where, if you got something interesting to say, you can say it or you can type it. Let me, don't just use my words. Let's go as I look through it. I look here. Chances are you live on a farm and you got a mattress there with corn cobs in it. That sounds comfortable. And what do? Here we go. In the middle colonies, winters were cold. The only source of heat was the fireplace. On cold winter nights, the family might huddle around the fire telling stories and shelling nuts. Okay, so there's no Netflix ever, and you're going to sit around, tell stories, and shell nuts. I never want to hear that you're bored again, right? Okay, so let's move on to the roles of women. Who do you marry? Right, it's chosen by your parents. What happened to a woman's property when she got married? Exactly, it all belonged to her husband now. Okay, we're going to talk more about that later. Now, if you notice though, on the West, the line between women's work and men's work differs. Pretty much the theory here is, I shouldn't use the word theory, but pretty much here's what happens. In the West, women are equal at work. In the man's world, everybody, hey, you're both digging ditches, you're both putting up fences, you're both cleaning up the pen or whatever it is you're doing. And then women go, hey, how come I'm doing the same work you are, but I don't get to vote? This is why Wyoming and Utah and the western states have suffrage before the eastern states. And what do the kids get to play with in the section marked young people? What do they get to play with? You're right. It's better than bad, it's good. It's the corn cob, okay? Corn cob. All right. So now let's move on to the social classes, okay? You've got the gentry. You don't have to write down every word here. I just want you to know when you hear gentry, that's the top class. It's another word for elite or something along those lines. And then you've got the small middle class, and then you've got your indentured servants, okay? And remember, indentured servant, you pledge a certain amount of time, you expect a certain amount of land, okay? Okay, and below indentured servants, you had slaves. But I do want to mention this, not all African Americans were slaves at this time period. You have free African Americans, and they're allowed to own land, and they can even own slaves. Sometimes they're going to purchase their relatives or their wife out of slavery, okay? They can be an indentured servant, or in the middle class, they can be slaves. All right, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the lesson. Next time, we'll finish up chapter 4. Take care.